Hello, and welcome to today's Technical Assistance webinar for the Diversity Specialized Predoctoral to Postdoctoral Advancement in Neuroscience Award, also known as the DSPAN Award. Please note that you will be muted during the webinar. You may type your questions into the Q&A box as shown on the screen. We will have a Q&A at the end of the webinar. For the outline of today's webinar, I will introduce you to the speakers. They will introduce the DSPAN program, discuss the F99 K00 application components, talk about the review considerations, and then we will end the webinar with a question and answer session. Our speakers for today will be Dr. Michelle Jones-London, Chief of the Office of Programs to Enhance Neuroscience Workforce Diversity at NINDS, Dr. Lauren Ulrich, a Program Director at NINDS, Dr. Bill Benzing, a Scientific Review Officer at NINDS, and Dr. Latasia Jones, a Scientific Review Officer at NINDS. And now I'll turn it over to Dr. Jones-London.
Thank you, Dr. Matthews, and thank you all for your interest in making time to attend the webinar today. I think we can all agree that the field of neuroscience over the recent years has really achieved a lot of exciting research advances, and the data shows that the number of trainees is ever growing in this area. However, the lack of diversity remains an issue across the biomedical workforce, and neuroscience is unfortunately no different. NIH believes that engaging trainees and researchers from every segment of American society is necessary to leverage the US intellectual capital. The diversity of our country's population is also an extraordinary resource whose potential can only be realized by fully engaging the talent, intelligence, and drive of all of its members, regardless of race, ethnicity, or disability. Studies have shown that a diverse workforce results in higher scientific research through greater innovation, creativity, and discovery. While many are excited about the research areas that are coming up in neuroscience, many trainees, perhaps even you viewing this webinar today, may feel that the current research environment is very challenging and perhaps have gone back and forth on whether the research career is even a desirable one. The goal of this initiative is to convince you not that this is the right path for you if you don't want to take it, but to provide support, mentorship, and resources for those who do see becoming an independent neuroscience researcher as a viable pathway to use your talents and your passions. The NIH Blueprint and BRAIN DSPAN program seeks to increase levels of participation of diverse trainees transitioning from graduate school to the postdoctoral positions. And it does this by providing a continuum of support throughout this critical postgraduate career stage by creating accountability and structured processes for ongoing assessment, enhancing mentorship, and empowering diverse trainees to choose postdoctoral environments that really match their skill sets and scientific interests with minimal financial constraints. This two-phased award will facilitate completion of the doctoral dissertation and transition of talented graduate students to strong neuroscience research postdoctoral positions. It will hopefully provide you the career development opportunities relevant to your long-term career goal of becoming independent neuroscience researchers. The mechanism involves two phases of funding. It provides 1 to 2 years of support for completing your PhD dissertation, and that's the F99 phase. You'll see that in blue. And you must have a minimum of 12 months of support in the F99 phase. And then up to 4 years of support for postdoctoral training in the K00 phase, that's in green. Awardees will receive the F99 funding near the end of the dissertation research and can then bring up to 4 years of K00 support to the selected postdoc at any US institution. Keep in mind that this program is bigger than just one neuroscience NIH institute. It is actually funded and supported by the NIH Blueprint and the BRAIN Initiative as a collaborative and coordinated effort. On the right of the slide and at the top of the funding opportunity announcement, or the RFA, you can see a list of the 12 participating NIH institutes and centers. The DSPAN F99K00 award is intended for individuals who have demonstrated an interest in any neuroscience research topic in an NIH blueprint or brain initiative research area, and this has to be for both phases. You can learn more about the NIH blueprint and the brain initiative on their respective homepages. Now, probably the most important part is that we don't want anyone investing time in writing an application that does not match the NIH policy requirements and will therefore end up being withdrawn or not considered for review. First, you must self-identify as being a person from a diverse background, including individuals from nationally underrepresented groups in neuroscience research. You'll want to look at the notice of NIH's interest in diversity to see if you qualify. Secondly, to apply, you must also be a US citizen or permanent resident. Current F31 awardees and appointees on T32s are eligible to apply, but you cannot hold 2 training awards at the same time. If awarded the F31 or on a T32 appointment, it would have to end. Dual degree or professional doctorate students, such as MDs, are not eligible because their training timeline is not compatible with this funding mechanism. At the time of award, applicants are expected to require 1 to 2 years to complete their PhD dissertation research, that is the F99 phase, before transitioning to the mentored postdoctoral research training, K00 phase. Typically, an applicant should be in their maybe 3rd or 4th year of graduate school when they apply. If you are outside of that range, you are still allowed to apply, but you must make a strong case for why you will either finish early or need additional training in the lab beyond the 6 years. We really recommend that if you are sort of near that end stage and are require less than maybe the 1 to 2 years, that you instead look into applying for the NINDS F32 or even the Brain Initiative F32, which allows you to apply up to a year before you enter your postdoc lab. If you believe your timeline is a little bit out of range or you maybe have an unusual path, please just reach out to us. Contact myself or Lauren. We're happy to talk to you. Some example exceptions are for someone who had a documented leave of absence due to health and maybe needs more time in terms of their training, or for someone applying in year 2 who maybe has already a master's degree and is expected to graduate within 2 years. So you could have a reason for staying a little bit later or finishing a little early. Just reach out to us. Part of your application will contain verification by your institution that you are at the dissertation phase and are currently in a PhD program in a neuroscience relevant field. That field is necessary, but you don't have to be in a neuroscience department. The other thing is that you do have to have a desire to have a career as an independent investigator in neuroscience research. And you must have mission relevance to one of the neuroscience institutes listed on the FOA, as I described on slide number 7. If you have any questions about these eligibility statements or anything I've discussed on this slide, just reach out to us. Terms of transition from the F99 to the K00. You do not have to have a postdoctoral position or mentor established at the time of application submission. In the majority of cases, your K00 postdoc will be at a different institution and with a different mentor. The application includes career goals and objectives, the application's plan for career development training activities during your award period, biosketches of your K00 mentors and plans and statements for the K00 mentors and other documents. If approved, the K00 will support 4 years of postdoctoral research. If an applicant begins a postdoctoral position or completes all PhD dissertation requirements before an F99 award is made, neither the F99 award nor the K00 award will be issued. Some things about before you start and sort of thinking about this before you begin down the road for the application. You're going to want to discuss the following with your mentor and also think about this very, very deeply with yourself. Define your career goals. Explicitly define what you want out of your career goals in your area of research interests. Outline the techniques, skills, knowledge, and relationships necessary to help you achieve that goal. Really think about scientific and professional skills that you will need to acquire as a postdoctoral research, and also think about it in terms of beyond, really forming a whole narrative and story. Third, performance skills or gap analysis. This is really important that you think about what skills from this career goal or this area of interest have you already mastered? What skills need to be developed? Define your research plan in terms of how will the two phases of your research, the F99 and the K00, build off of your existing strengths to provide you with the skills, techniques, and data that will help you facilitate to your successful postdoc and beyond. Also, look at a training plan that is not generic. How is it tailored to your needs? What are the activities that you will need to perform and develop your professional skills? And then also assess the guidance and the mentorship that you need. You know, many times we see mentoring teams, but there should be a role and a responsibility for each person. How will each person that you've identified contribute to your development, and make sure that all the areas are covered? And that's areas with respect to research, but also areas with respect to career development. For the F99 phase, you really want to provide and talk about support for finishing the dissertation research. We expect an outstanding application to articulate a thoughtful research project that shows and exemplifies rigorous science, that has a clearly stated rationale, goes beyond experimental details, and really offers perspective about the work in terms of outcomes and significance. For the K00 phase, most applicants will not have committed to a postdoc lab. So this is really going to be in broad strokes. We won't expect to see a lot of detail, but a mature application should be able to articulate in broad strokes the future research direction and what is needed to develop the career through the next stage. In terms of putting it all together in this, as I said, this bigger picture, you really want to tell a consistent story. You know, many of the application components can sometimes feel like you're just repeating, but really it's intentionally there to reinforce key themes and expand on fruitful areas. It's really important to get outside feedback, share this document with people that are outside of your field and outside of your lab. And finally, some tips to avoid, you know, common errors is really, you know, don't include everything in the kitchen sink in terms of unnecessary or irrelevant activities. We've already talked about generic plans. This should really speak to you, your interests, your goals, your future plans. List specific activities, why you're doing them, and how they will advance you towards your goal. The mentor and the mentee section should match up. There shouldn't be a mismatch. It should really clearly ring through that you're having conversations and you're working together towards your common goal. In terms of poor grantsmanship, you don't want reviewers to be sidetracked or distracted by sloppiness. Please make sure that you proofread and look for typographical and grammatical errors. Also, as I said before, really get advice from people around you. You don't have to do this alone. Use your support system. Use people in your lab, outside of your lab, and don't just copy a training plan from another successful application. This is about you. Each person has a different background and is pursuing different goals. It should be written in your voice, not someone else's. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Lauren Ulrich, who will take us through the actual application components.
Thank you, Dr. Jones-London. So this section will be a little bit drier because we're going to be going through the application bit by bit, but we think it's really important that we provide this resource because we know for a lot of you, this is the first, maybe the second time you're applying for NIH funding. It's very overwhelming. There's hundreds of pages of instructions, and it can be hard to know exactly what you need to put in the application, sort of how to write it. So that's what this webinar is for. So first, just a little bit of general guidance on how to approach reading an FOA or a funding opportunity announcement. So first, use all of the resources that we've provided on the DSPAN website, on the Blueprint website. There is another webinar from 2020 featuring awardees that talks more generally and more big picture about how they put their application together. There is a tip sheet. There is a list of changes with this new FOA that was just issued in 2021, and some other resources on there. So definitely use those. Read the entire FOA, including the review criteria, which are very important. Also read the fellowship or the F instructions of the Sf424 application guide. These are long. Sometimes maybe you're just going to skim them, but it is very important that you go through because they do have very important information in there. You will follow the instructions in the FOA unless it directs you to the application guide. If it does, then you can use the F31 instructions, but the FOA always trumps anything in the application guide. So first you have just the general NIH application guide, which includes all of the sections. Then you have the specific application guide, so the fellowship instructions, which is section 9. Then you have the funding opportunity announcement, which is the most important. And if you have any questions about what you should include or not include, please just reach out to us. We're happy to clarify. So for this application, you're going to use the Sf424 R&R fellowship package. Remember that the specific aims and research strategy sections follow a non-traditional format. This is very important. And like I said, the major changes on this reissue are flagged on the Blueprint website. So maybe you're looking at someone else's application, or if you're watching the webinar from 2020, there will be certain differences, and you can see those highlighted in our tip sheet. So first, the letters of reference. So you need at least 3 and at most 5 letters of reference. You should start now on talking to people and starting to request those letters of reference. The instructions are on a separate page on the NIH website that is linked to in the FOA, and all of the instructions are there. You should tell your referees what you want them to say about you. Don't write the letter for them, but you can give them your Biosketch. You can remind them of how you've worked together, what you've accomplished. If there's something specific that you'd like them to highlight about you, so your leadership, your scientific thinking, your problem solving, tell them that, right? And let them know, because each of your referees is going to talk about a different part of you. And together, they'll provide a fuller picture of you as a scientist and why you'd be so great getting this funding and what you do with it. So make sure you help them help you. The referees that you choose should not be directly involved in the application. So they shouldn't be your sponsor, your co-sponsor. They shouldn't be key personnel in your application. And make sure to check the status of the letters often. So you can go into the system and see whether or not your referees have submitted their letters, because late letters are not accepted. And if you don't have at least 3 letters, the application will not be reviewed. And there's nothing that we on the program side can do about that. So we have a whole list of forms that are required for this application, and they're available at the link, and they are also linked to in the FOA. So we have the Sf424 that I mentioned earlier, the Fellowship Supplemental Form, the Senior or Key Person Profile Form, which is where the Biosketches go, the R&R Other Project Information, your Project Performance Site Locations, and then your Human Subjects and Clinical Trials Information. So we'll go through each of those sections one by one. First is the Sf424 Form One, which is also called the cover sheet. Importantly, you want to put, for the start date, the start of the F99 phase. The earliest start date will be listed in the FOA in sort of the top section, where it'll say, if you're applying for this application date, the earliest start date for your project will be this date. So for example, a December application, the earliest start date is usually July 1st, for example. So that's the earliest date you should put in there. If you want to do a little bit later start date, that is also okay. The end date should be the end of the K00 phase. So that'll either be 5 or 6 years from the start date, depending on how much time you would like in the F99 phase. So remember, it's 1 to 2 years in the F99 phase and up to 4 years of the K00 phase. The estimated project funding should cover both phases, and this is just an estimate only. And you can ask your grants personnel or your Office of Sponsored Research to sort of help you come up with that estimate. And you can use the information in the budget section of the RFA to estimate that budget and then just guess the K00 phase. Another thing I'd like to note in the FOA is if you need any kind of ADA accommodations, you can request additional funding. It's called extraordinary costs to help you manage your disability or whatever kind of accommodations that you need. And you just need a justification or an explanation of what the funds will be used for. For item 21, the cover letter, you need to include a list of referees, the name, the departmental affiliation, and institution in that cover letter. So for part B, we have the applicant's backgrounds and goals for fellowship training. This is another section that has different instructions than the application guide. So there's 3 parts in this section. Part A, the doctoral dissertation and research experience, where you're going to follow the instructions for advanced graduate students. That's in the Sf424 application guide. Part B, for training goals and objectives, you want to make sure that this really covers both phases. And you're describing both your short and your long-term career goals that are really pulled together into a systematic plan where you talk about what is the logical progression from your dissertation to your postdoc to your independent research career, and really justifying why you need this further career development, why you need these last 1 to 2 years in the graduate phase in order to have a successful postdoc, and then what are you going to do in that postdoc to then become a successful independent investigator. You're going to be thinking about the professional development skills and research skills, theories, conceptual approaches, everything that you're going to be learning during this time. And, your skills in research design, methods, data analysis, interpretation, all of that. Thinking again about the gaps and how you're going to fill them. And then also, if you've decided to go in a very different direction for your K00, think about what you're going to do during your graduate career to prepare you for that. So, for example, let's say you're doing research in epilepsy and you want to move into Alzheimer's for your postdoc. So you might include like an Alzheimer's course, Alzheimer's journal clubs, in order to sort of prepare you for this shift. And part C is activities planned under the award. So really listing out everything that you're going to be doing, the percent of time that is going to be dedicated to each activity. You're going to have a detailed timeline, and all of that and more should be in the applicant's backgrounds and goals for fellowship training. So part C of the Phs Supplemental Form includes your specific aims and your research strategy, which, as we mentioned, have specific instructions in the RFA, or the funding opportunity announcement, the respective contributions, the selection of your sponsor and institution, and the training and responsible conduct of research. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Jones-London to take you through each of these parts.
Thank you. So let's start with the specific aims page. And this will be a little bit different than, perhaps your colleagues or your peers that are developing F31s. There's a very they could have 1 to 2 or 3 different specific aims. For all of the F99 K00s, all applicants must use 2 specific aims. Specific aim 1 will be the dissertation research project. Here you'll provide a detailed description of the overall dissertation research project, what has been accomplished to date. You can include preliminary data, and the research that will need to be completed during this F99 phase. That's your specific aim 1. Specific aim 2 is the postdoctoral research direction. Here you're identifying the research direction to be pursued for the K00 phase. Applicants should organize their approach to mirror the 2 specific aims, and applicants should individually address the significance and approach for each specific aim. Let's go to aim 1. As I already said, this is going to be your dissertation. You're going to give really a big picture overview of the work that you're doing for your dissertation. The research strategy should offer a rationale and hypothesis. The other thing is that you're going to really want to demonstrate here what is, once again, the rigorous thinking that you've been doing in terms of the research plan. What tools have you been using? What techniques? and really pay close attention to talking about caveats and maybe alternative approaches as you're talking about the approach for this aim. For the approach for the aim, you're going to divide this into 2 sections. It's going to be a progress report on what you've completed or done thus far. Here you'll also maybe include some of that preliminary data that I referenced. And then secondly, you'll talk about a detailed research proposal for what is supposed to be completed. Keeping in mind, this should also match up to the time that you propose. If you've proposed 1 year for the F99, it should make sense that this approach is going to fill that timeline. If you propose 2, it should match that. And then the research and the career development milestones for all building up to the transition from the F99 phase to the K00 award phase. And that's aim 1. Aim 2, that's the postdoctoral research direction. Here, things are going to be, once again, more in broad strokes. You really don't know where the actual institution is that you're maybe going to. But at the end of the day, you still have to talk about how you're going to get from point A to point B and really think about the scientific questions that you want to do as a part of your postdoc research and really think about what you'll be investigating. Explain the significance and the rationale for the K00 research directions. Reviewers should be able to see, why you're moving into one area to another. And it is okay to not have the research plan be a continuation or within scope of what you did for the pre-doc. It is totally fine to switch research areas. The only thing is that it has to continue to be relevant to the NIH blueprint or brain neuroscience research areas. You want to give the reviewers a logical connection to perhaps what you were doing previously and how these experiences are now relevant to the new area, or maybe you are continuing, or how it's building upon the research that you did before. In the aim 2 approach, you're going to give a general description of how the research will be conducted. And once again, you won't have a lot of specificity. This will be broadly described, and include approaches, methodologies that could be used, any anticipated results in terms of how you're thinking about the topic, and challenges that may arise and how to address them. All of this would be forecasting. Here you're also going to talk about career and professional development skills to be acquired, and also detail what you're going to be looking for in terms of a research environment. The potential mentors, you won't actually need to name or identify them, but you're going to describe them. So describe the type of mentorship that you'll be looking for, the environment that'll be needed, the techniques and skills that you will need to be learned, and the type of mentorship that would be able to help you achieve that. Research strategy section, and this is going to be 6 pages. Applicants will need to individually address the significant and approach for each of these aims and relate each of the aims to your career goals. You want to make sure that both the research and the training and career development, they're all telling a cohesive story. You also want to take a broad bird's eye view that is a comprehensive viewpoint when really writing this, and also use a narrative style. This is the part where you want to put this all together and carefully then consider the review criteria prior to writing it. Next, we'll talk about the sponsor and co-sponsor part of the application. This is going to be written by your sponsor. It's 6 pages. It includes, as I said, if you do have a co-sponsor, they'll also have to put in information here as well. There are several components, and they're going to be labeled throughout the instructions. You're going to want to talk about, or the mentor or sponsor is going to want to talk about the research support available. It's really important that the reviewers can see that you're in a situation where you'll be able to finish up your PhD and have the financial support to be able to do so. If there are circumstances where the mentor's funding is maybe ending, or they see that their person does not have a current award, then you're going to want to talk about how the institutional support or other supports, maybe through a co-mentor, are available to you. You just don't want to leave anything to guess. You want to give the reviewers a strong sense that you have the financial support to complete your dissertation project. You're also going to want to see in terms of the prior trainees, really giving a total number for both of the mentors or one of the mentors, the details of the mentorship, giving the reviewers a sense that this mentor has done it before in terms of transitioning scholars. And if the mentor does not have this experience level, have they brought in someone else to help facilitate that part of your training and support. You're going to talk about the training plan, the environment, and the research facilities in this part. And here, the training plan, once again, it has to be personalized for your background and your strengths and be consistent with the rest of the application. It should address areas where more development is needed and should be aligned with your career goals. Make sure the role of all of the mentors involved is clear and that the inclusion of anyone in terms of adding on a mentoring team or a co-sponsor really adds value to your training plan. You don't want to get into a situation where, sometimes people add someone, it's a Nobel laureate, they're down the hall, but the reviewers really see that there's no rhyme or reason or really direct connection to you or your research. So make sure that everyone listed, everyone involved, everyone engaged has a role and a responsibility. In terms of putting this all together, this information in terms of the training plan may be written by the primary sponsor, by the sponsoring team, or with each writing a separate section in terms of their specific part of it that they have ownership for when it comes to the training. With regards to the environment, the research facilities, do not recapitulate the facilities and other resources. Be strategic in what you include here. In terms of the current trainees, if it is a very large group, discuss the lab structure, the hierarchy, and the frequency of interactions between the sponsor and you. And the qualifications part, that's the applicant's qualifications and potential for a research career. Your sponsor should really use this as a chance to really sing your praises. The description should match the training plan and may be written by the primary sponsor, or once again, if it's a sponsoring team, each of those individuals can add to the chorus of singing how great you are. The letters of support from collaborators, contributors, and consultants. Here you're going to want to have signed statements from every collaborator that you list or every consultant, really confirming their understanding and their participation in your F99 project. And once again, really outlining their specific role. It should make sense that what you said is what they're understanding. Biosketches of collaborators are optional, but if they are key to the project and to their role in terms of your training or the research rather, it's really highly recommended that you include them. Also, what we've seen recently is that many people also maybe have a member of an advisory committee providing letters of support. This should be included as relevant information to your research training and your future goals. You want to tie that all in together. The co-sponsor information belongs in the sponsor information section, not here. And here is just a really nice table that kind of helps you decide who needs what in terms of documentation. It is really your choice how to designate people. Only you can tell what is that person's role from how they're going to be involved in the research, but it must be clear what function they are serving. And there must be evidence that both you and the person are on the same page about these functions. So a letter of support is important. In addition to involving mentors in the application, as I said, you can also have collaborators, consultants, and advisory committee members. And each of these different roles, you'll want to look on this chart and see whether the Biosketch or documentation, what kind of documentation is it for the different roles. Individuals are usually not considered senior or key personnel unless they contribute in a substantive way. And that is a meaningful way to the career development of the candidate or the career development of the project. And with that, I'll turn it over back again to Dr. Ulrich.
All right, so continuing with our forms that are required. For the Phs Supplemental Form, you need to provide the description of the institutional environment and commitment to training. And so this piece is where you want to document strong, well-established research program related to your area of interest. You want to talk about opportunities for intellectual interactions with other investigators, such as the courses that are offered, journal clubs, seminars, presentations, sort of anything that's relevant to your to you and your development. And thinking about what facilities and other resources that will be available both for your career enhancement and also the research that's proposed in the application. And in addition to what's described in the application guide, we also have specific bullets that are described in the FOA. So the actual graduate program, so the structure of the program, courses, time to degree, we need the progress, your progress or your status in relation to the expected timeline. How are they monitoring and evaluating your progress? They also need to confirm that you're in the PhD program in a neuroscience relevant field, the date of entry and the date that you reach the dissertation phase. Confirm that you have 1 to 2 years from time of award before completion, including month and year of anticipated graduation, the name of your primary sponsor, and an affirmative commitment to your training and research goals. And then at the end, the name of the individual providing this information, which is usually the director of the graduate program or the department chair. Next, you need to also include a description of the candidate's contribution to program goals. So this is another thing that is provided by the sponsoring institution. So they have to provide this document on institutional letterhead that explains how your participation will further the goals of the DSPAN program to promote diversity in neuroscience research. So again, we'll direct you to the Notice of NIH's Interest in Diversity to learn more about those goals. The attachment must be dated and signed by an institutional official. And again, usually this will be a dean, chair of the department, one of those people. The other research training plan section will include human subjects and vertebrate animals information, a resource sharing plan that talks about data sharing, model organisms, and genomic data, and authentication of key biological or chemical resources, and then any additional information. For the budget, you want to make sure to check the box for tuition and fees. And then there is also the appendix section, which is rarely used for fellowships, but it is very important that you do not use the appendix to circumvent the page limitations. So there are very, very narrow types of things that can be included in the appendix. Don't include anything in there that is not supposed to be there. For the senior or key person profile, so this is your information, your sponsor's information, and the Biosketch. So you are the PD or PI. You need to have an ERA Comms account and an ORCID ID, and these can take a little while to set up, so just make sure you do that in advance. You want to use the pre-doctoral fellowship applicant biographical sketch. It is different than the standard Biosketch, so make sure to use the correct one. And for fellows, it is okay to list manuscripts in preparation, submitted, or in revision in that section about your contributions to science, but it should be in the narrative piece of that section. For your sponsor, the role is other professional, and then you either enter sponsor or co-sponsor as appropriate in the other project role category field. And then any other senior or key personnel, as we mentioned earlier, are people who are contributing to your scientific development or execution of the project. And this is even if they're not committing, a specific level of effort to the project. So for the Biosketch, this is another place where we have specific instructions in the FOA. Make sure that you include the start date, the month, and the year of all of your education or training experiences. In your personal statement, you want to follow the instructions for applicants for dissertation research awards in the application guide. And this is including a description of your career goals, your career trajectory, your interest in these specific research areas. And then we also recommend that, if relevant, you account for factors that affected past productivity. So this could be that you had to switch labs or institutions. This could be health issues, birth of a child, family issues, really, anything to give context to your specific journey within your graduate training or even your undergraduate training. And again, this doesn't have to be detailed. This is not an excuse. This is merely providing context for the reviewers. If this makes you feel uncomfortable, your sponsor or your co-sponsor can write about it in their section, or your letters of recommendation can also be other people that can speak to relevant experiences. For the Scholastic Performance section, you want to list your undergraduate courses, but you do not need to include your grades. You do need to include your graduate courses and grades. The sponsor and co-sponsor's biosketch should also, in their personal statement, describe their mentoring and training philosophy and include a commitment to diversity and inclusion in the training environment. For the R&R Other project information, there's a section for international activities, and although foreign institutions are not allowed to apply, foreign components are permitted. So for example, if you're getting trained in a foreign lab, then, so the section would go there. The explanation would go there. Then you'll have your project summary and abstract, your project narrative, and those should both cover both phases of the award, your bibliography and your references, and then facilities and other resources and equipment are the F99 phase only, because you don't know where you're going for the K00 phase. The project performance site locations, you should list all the sites where the research will be done. The primary site is usually the same as the submitting institution. And then if you're doing research at an affiliate site, you should just include as a secondary site. All applicants must use the human subjects form, regardless of your answer to the question, are human subjects involved? So you just follow the instructions in the application guide. You should not provide an NCT number in section 1. And you don't need to complete section 4 or 5 because clinical trials are not allowed in the DSPAN award. So you can get experience in a sponsor's clinical trial. So that's very important. And if you have questions about that, please don't hesitate to contact us because the guidance here has evolved over the past several years. So we know it can be confusing. Finally, if you're planning on applying after hearing all of this, you can send us a letter of intent to submit an application at NINDS@mail.nih.gov. There's a list of the specific information that we need, and we appreciate that 30 days before the due date. This is not required, but it is appreciated to help us plan review. And very importantly, more than one person may apply from an institution. So we know that for other F99 awards, such as the NCI award, they're limited to one per institution. That is not the case for the DSPAN. So we highly encourage everyone who is eligible and interested to apply, even if others from your institution are also applying. So now I'm going to turn it over to our scientific review officer, Dr. Bill Betzing.
Hi. Yeah, once your application comes in, it'll get assigned to a study section and be evaluated by peers in neuroscience. One of the best things you can do when you're constructing your application is once you have a draft is in the RFA, go down to near the bottom of the FOA and go to the scored review criteria. It's in the section 5, the application review information. And compare what you've got in your application to the bullet points under each of the 5 scored review criteria, and make sure your application addresses as best as it can these bullet points. These are what the reviewers are actually given and asked to address or evaluate your application upon. And there's a scored section on fellowship applicant, sponsors, collaborators and consultants, research training plan, training potential and the training development plan, and institutional environment and commitment to training. Remember, the emphasis of the review will be on how well you present your thesis research and your training plan, on your sponsors and collaborators' statements and how they will assist you in your training, as well as how your thesis research training will prepare you for your future career development, as indicated in your K00 phase aim. One of the things that really helps in review, as Michelle alluded earlier to, double check and make sure that you don't have grammatical errors and typos. These kind of things really negatively affect the reviewer's opinion of the quality of your training and your ability to communicate and present your ideas and your research, as well as your goals in your career. A good idea is to have someone who's unfamiliar with your research and who will be honestly critical of your writing proof for your overall grammarsmanship and for ambiguous sentences or statements before you submit, obviously. The allowable post-submission materials are if you have papers that have been accepted for publication, or even if you've got a paper that you've indicated as submitted is now accepted or is actually published, you can submit that. And if there's new funding for a sponsor, if there's any changes in the sponsor or the key personnel specified in the original application, you can submit that. If there's any major changes in anyone's biographical sketch, say due to hiring or replacement or loss of an investigator, as well as letters of support or collaboration due to the hiring, replacement, or loss of an investigator or collaborator. These are the kind of things that can be submitted, and they should be communicated to the scientific review officer no later than 30 calendar days before the day that the peer review meeting meets. And there's a form that you can fill out. It's a PHS study section assignment and request form. You do not need to fill this out. All F99 K00 applications, they're all reviewed in that one study section. And that panel has a diverse representation across for all of the funding institutes that support this grant mechanism. And for that reason, the presentation of your thesis research should be made to a more general neuroscience audience and should not be very heavy in jargon or very, specific to one field that only people in that field can understand. So you want to make this more generally, say you're giving a talk to a general neuroscience audience. With that, I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Latasia Jones, who will actually be taking over the review of these applications in the future. And she has some comments on review and how to best focus your application.
The only thing I wanted to kind of just overly emphasize was to motivate the applicants to take full control over their application and their proposal, and to let the reviewers know their plan is to get them to the next level or to help their transition into the next phase in their career. So picking the mentors, picking the training that they would need, the research project that they want to eventually take into a postdoc phase, or establishing their own lab later on, all of those things would need the details necessary to allow the reviewers to understand what their foolproof plan is. So working with the mentor is very important throughout that time to make sure that those all the key components can be provided, but the support is there as well.
Okay, that concludes our presentation, and now we'll go into the Q&A portion of the webinar. So please put your questions in the chat, and if we don't get to your question in the time that we have left, please reach out to myself or Dr. Jones-London using the email address on the screen. Thank you again for joining us today. We have a couple of questions. We've been answering questions in the chat, but we also have some questions that came in during registration. And so we're going to start with those, and then as more questions come in the chat, we'll see how much we can get through in the time that we have left.
Yeah, thank you for hanging in there.
So our first question is for Michelle, Dr. Jones-London. What makes an applicant competitive? So we have a lot of questions specifically about publications. Do you have to have a first author publication from graduate school, for example, or what are some other things that might make somebody more or less competitive for this award?
Yeah, and we get this question a lot, not only for this mechanism, but for other mechanisms as well. We sort of call this the Goldilocks question in terms of what is the magic number to secure me funding for this mechanism? How many papers do I need? And the reality is the answer is very nuanced. A lot of this will depend on the field that you're in, where you are in your pre-doctoral training. Certainly by the 5th year, reviewers are going to start looking more aggressively for that first author paper. Certainly, if you're applying in your 3rd year, they may expect, given the type of research, maybe it's not as common. They're going to look at a couple of pieces of information. They're going to look at your productivity in the whole aspect of, what have you done before? Not only with regards to papers, but also presentations. Say you don't have a first author paper, but it's clear maybe you have something in bioarchives, or that your presentations, you're showing the research and the science and the abstracts. And maybe it's common for that lab that you're in to really save up the research for a bigger paper at the end. A lot of times reviewers will talk about not holding the trainee accountable for the style of the lab or the PI. The message I would send is really looking at yourself holistically, taking a hard look at where you are in terms of the research and making sure you're using that Biosketch strategically to really show your level of productivity. That's what makes a competitive application. Make sure you aren't already saying no to yourself. The only way to guarantee not getting a grant is by not submitting the grant. So by telling yourself, I don't have a first author paper, I'm not going to be competitive, it's not really helpful. It's better to look at, why don't I have this? Is there a way that I can present to the reviewers to let them know that I'm still doing rigorous science, that this is the reason, without making excuses, and the fact that we've all lived through COVID, there could be a very good reason why you're delayed. And people understand that, but you have to present the case. You don't want them to do the guesswork and guessing why, is how I would answer that.
And if you have plans to submit first author publications, clearly indicate that, and also make sure your sponsor indicates that in their letters of support.
Good point, Bill.
Yes, can you hear me? Okay, I was gonna add that too. You have to remember that the reviewers can't guess things, right? They don't know what you're planning, what's in the making in your lab and your productivity and so on. So make sure you mention as many things as possible to make sure they are up to be updated on your progress and what you have to come.
All right, for our next question, it's more about the K00 part of it. So what level of specificity in the K00 plan is favorable? How can someone show feasibility for their M2 if they're trying to learn something new as they move into the K00 phase as a postdoc? And I think there's a lot of sort of in this question is about, I think, really even picking that K00 part. Do you have to have it secured at the time of application? Maybe Lauren, if you want to go a little bit into more of what that should look like.
Yeah, I mean, we get this question a lot, right? And it's a weird section to write, and we know that. You're trying to write about your future plans, but you don't actually know where you're going to end up or what sponsor you're going to be with. So, what I usually tell people is to start, like, what is your chalk talk going to be when you're going up for your independent research position? And I know that that's like a lot, that's very intimidating for people, but this isn't a contract that you're signing in blood. Your plans can change. What you want to show the reviewers is that you have that foresight, you have a vision, and you can plan for that vision. And then they're confident that if that vision changes, you have the skills to and the support to be able to change the plan as well so that it is still appropriate. So remember that the actual K00 research plan is going to be specified in the transition application. So once you've chosen your sponsor and your postdoc for the K00, then you're going to submit a whole new application. And so this is really more of a forward-thinking document. And you want to think about what is the research skills that you're going to need, the technical skills, the knowledge, and then also any institutional support and what kind of sponsorship are you going to need to succeed. So you want to think about what, all that in there, but then also how are you going to find this person? What are the qualities you want in a mentor? And you do not need to name names. That is totally fine. You can if you want to, but I think there is a danger in being too specific and too general. So if you're too specific, you're opening up critiques of everything that you've listed in the application is now fair game for the reviewers. And if you haven't had the time to sit down and really plan the postdoc, then maybe things aren't as fleshed out as they should be. On the other hand, if it's way too general and the reviewers don't have a clear picture of where you're going, that can also hurt you. So again, it's sort of this Goldilocks principle. And the best advice that I have is to have other people read your application. You can even try to reach out to other awardees. You can watch our webinar from 2020 where we have awardees talk about how they put their application together and the kinds of things they were thinking about. But really getting that outside perspective is one of the best ways that I've found to make sure that what you're saying makes sense and that you haven't forgotten anything or missed anything there.
Yeah.
So in terms of our next question, we have a question about the training plan. So Michelle, do you want to talk about what the reviewers looking for in terms of the training plan in particular?
Yeah, and this because of the nuances of this mechanism, they really are looking for in the F99 portion of it, are you being exposed to rigorous science and training is probably the number one. The second part is the training that you're getting now, is it going to help launch you to this postdoc? A lot of times the reviewers will look at the training plan and they'll even get excited and saying, oh my God, this is someone that I would want in my lab. So making sure that you're conveying that, the rigor of the science and the full picture of it, right? There's the research part of the training, but then there's the other aspects in terms of career development and professional development. Are they talking about grant writing? Are they talking about exposure to other aspects that's going to help you to prepare you when you go on to the postdoc? And once again, I talked about this singing. Are you and your mentor singing the same tune, right? It doesn't make sense. There's a certain aspect of storytelling that goes along with grant writing. And when reviewers can really read, we went through a whole alphabet soup of all these separate components. But at the end of the day, when they read this application, does it tell a full story and a full picture? It isn't like Choose Your Own Adventure where there's all these disjointed parts that it's like, okay, the mentor's saying this, but the trainee's saying something else. It is a full picture and a full story. And how that relates to the training and going on to the K00 is that that's the next chapter of your story. And so even though you don't have the specific details and of what institution, you should still be able to almost give like a coming attractions of, this is the themes that I'd like to be working on. These are the techniques that I would like to do. And especially if you're switching areas, you want to, as we already talked about, maybe talk about learning some of those techniques or getting exposure to those techniques as part of the training plan of the F99 to prepare you for the K00. So, that would be my best advice, is telling a consistent thorough story, not only with the training plan, but making sure the training plan doesn't exist in isolation, but that it relates back to the research. And then also with the K00, those future directions.
Bill, or even Letitia, can you tell us how these grants are scored? So many people ask, are they scored like the F31, which has a score in its percentile, but can you talk a little bit about what that will look like for this award type?
Yeah, all of the DSPAN F99 applications are evaluated in one review panel. Thus, they're all evaluated for any given funding cycle. They're all evaluated and scored at the same time. And thus, there's no need for a percentile to be assigned. So you'll just get a priority score and no percentile. Percentiles are used or assigned to applications where the competing applications are evaluated in 2 or more different review panels. And this allows, they do this so it allows a comparative ranking to compare between applications of a certain mechanism between review panels. And again, since the DSPAN F99 applications will all be evaluated together, there's no need for percentiles. And they can be ranked by their actual priority score. And then, I mean, we could do percentiles, but it would just be duplicative of the priority score.
Okay, and we're officially on time, but I'm just going to sneak in one last question. So if the applicant plans to resubmit their F99, what advice do you have for that process? So Michelle, do you want to start us off there?
Yeah, and it's really important to know that we have changed the specific aims. If say you submitted the last round and you're resubmitting now, heads up, there are now 2 specific aims. The earlier iteration, we had 3, so pay attention to that. It's really important that you be responsive to the reviewer's critiques from that first review. That is something that comes up often, and Bill, I'm sure will want to jump in on that comment too. They often judge how that's the first thing they'll comment on, is how responsive were they to our previous concerns. And that means responsiveness doesn't always mean saying, yes, I'm going to do it like this, but giving a reason why, justifying, but addressing it. What really ticks reviewers off is when they suggest something and in the A1, it's like it was never said. That really gets them going. Because we have a committed sort of cohort of reviewers, Dr. Benzine is really good about making sure that the application has the benefit of being seen by probably the reviewers that have reviewed it before. So it's really important that you and your mentor, you sit down and you figure out a way to be responsive or just commenting on some of those concerns. And you'll do that. There's a 1-page where you'll sort of go and you'll respond. I don't know, Bill, if you want to add something to the resubmission as well.
Yeah, I was going to say that even if you are 100% certain you explained something previously and the reviewers didn't get it, don't come back aggressive or be snarky or anything. Just apologize that you weren't clear, and then address their concerns and address all the concerns. And something I tell applicants of any type of NIH grant are when you are almost ready with your proposal, which is a good idea, I mean, a good reason to do it early, is to give it to someone that has done review and who does not know the specific research you're proposing, because you hand it to your mentor or your sponsor or your colleagues that are very familiar. They can fill in all the blanks where you're not being clear in what you're writing. And so if you can get someone that will be critical and is not so familiar with your work that they can fill in the blanks, they will be able to tell you where you're not being clear in presenting your hypothesis, your rationale, your proposed research. And this is often the case where you get criticized, and in an application have to come back is because, they couldn't fill in the blanks. And even though, you may be sure that you explained them very, adequately, if they didn't get it, then it's probably because it wasn't very clear. And so, just when you come back in, don't be aggressive, don't be snarky. That turns them off, as well as not addressing all or most all the concerns.
Yeah, and do come back in. The reality is that especially by applying to this mechanism, you are saying you want a career in academic research. And I hate to tell you, but that means sometimes resubmitting your grant, and it's not going to be that you're always going to get it on your first shot. So it's really important that you think about that. You go into this putting in your most competitive application possible. But at the end of the day, if you don't score enough to be funded that first round, if you have the time and eligibility, resubmit. Don't be deflated by it. You're in good company. And the second thing is, if you've timed out of the D-SPAN, NIH has a wealth of training mechanisms. I mean, we've already mentioned the F32. Reach out to, either us at NINDS, or maybe you're at another institute. There are wonderful people in the training divisions all across NIH that will be willing to talk to you and say, if not the D-SPAN, then what else? You've timed out for this. Let's talk about an F32. The thing is to, feel empowered that by the sheer fact that you wrote that application and you've laid out a plan, you could repurpose that information if it doesn't end up being the D-SPAN.
Yes, and don't get deflated. It's a huge piece of advice from Michelle. If you think about, the best batters in baseball, they get out, 67 and 70% of the time, and they only get on base 20 to 30% of the time, and the ones that are successful 30% of the time are the ones that are the best. And so you just can't get deflated and come back in and address the concerns or repurpose it into a different mechanism.
Agreed. So that's all that we have time for. We've already gone over. If we have questions that you did not get addressed, that we're not able to get to, please reach out to us and email us with those questions. And then I will end with a plug for our podcast. It's called Building Up the Nerve. You can find it on any of the podcast platforms. And in season 2, we address each of the different aspects of the application. So we have a section about the Biosketch, we have a section about resubmission, about the sponsor plan, and but from applicants that have actually successfully gotten these awards. And then season 1 is more about the NIH grant cycle in general and how it works behind the scenes and what to expect. So if you have more general questions, a great place to look for answers is our podcast. So thank you all again for joining us, and the recording will be posted on the website if you missed anything or you want to rewatch it.
Happy writing.
Bye-bye.